this. It's a text I just got. His deal is done with the Islanders. So I don't know if that means either of you guys have to go write something.
Nope.
You're good. Okay. All right. Sounds like Wojciech might.
At some point I will, but
okay. Well, we'll try to. We'll do this.
Yeah.
We are live, but I guess someone just texted me. Johnny Boychuk tweeted out, yes, 7 more years. So I guess that's either
that sounds like it's done.
Yeah, either he and his wife just renewed their vows in some way. He bought a house, maybe a membership to a country club, but perhaps this is his contract. So anyway, but we'll get into that later, guys. Let's start the show. Hey, Hockey World, how you doing? It's Thursday, March 12th, 2015.
Oh.
you want to do that?
Yeah, I got to get there.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead, Kevin. All right, yeah. I will mute you for a second. All right, so that was Kevin Allen, and this is Eric DeHashik from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, how are you, Eric?
We have getting this show on the road. I don't know if you're allowed to say that to the viewers and listeners, but
well, I think it's perfectly legitimate to say that that I could have probably baked this entire chicken pot pie, which I'm eating, in the period of time that my wife left this out and said, "You frosted the chicken pot pie. You have to eat it today." Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to eat an entire chicken pot pie.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. And by the way, eating at your computer screen is not the healthiest thing in the world either. So I think somebody should
yes, I agree.
That, so.
Absolutely. And I'm back in my. You didn't actually even see any of the shows we did from my other set, my special set for the trade deadline. So I'm back in my other home, my office. So.
Oh, exactly. Well, yeah, it's funny because we missed last week, and I guess that gave us where we lost the impetus to actually kick around the moves at the trading deadline. It's funny how they percolate through the reality of what comes next. The Anaheim Ducks were just in Calgary last night, and on the one hand, I really admire what the Ducks have done this year because they're playing a second-year goaltender and a first-year goaltender. Both of them have been hurt at different times this year. They've tried to fix the things that were wrong with them by bringing in Brizgala, by bringing in Brewer, by bringing in Rene Bourque. None of that worked. They brought in 5 guys at the trading deadline. 5 guys for the one team that's basically home and cooled. I mean, Anaheim has very little left to play for. They're going to win the Pacific. They'll probably get the crossover team from the Central. And everybody else, whether they're at the top of the league or at the top of their division, they're jockeying for playoff spots or for home ice advantage. And Anaheim is just there off on an island by themselves. Yeah. They did not look very good against the Flames last night. They got a quick 2-0 lead and lost 6-3. And it looks like they have 16 or 17 games left. I'm not sure how many exactly, but they got to work things out because they are not firing on all cylinders right now.
Are they a little bit of what we saw with the Blues last year, do you think? A little bit of that burnout factor, or is it more injuries? It seems like with them it's injuries, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a long talk with Corey Perry, actually a very interesting one, because, we haven't talked a lot about the effects of mumps. That was like a big hot story for about 2 months in the National Hockey League, and then all the experts predicted, and they were correct, that that it would eventually go away. But Perry was telling me that it took a while for him. Like, he was back in the lineup after missing 5 games, but he didn't really feel right again for some time after that. And then soon after, he started to just get it going a little bit. He hurt his knee and missed another 10 games. So I just think that people have been asking about Sidney Crosby's year, and there hasn't been a lot of years where Sidney Crosby, when he's been healthy, and I guess healthy is the wrong word, injury-free, that he hasn't distanced himself in the scoring race. But I wonder if there's been like the residual effects of the mumps there. Just it takes you out of that mid-season conditioning level that you're in, and then suddenly you're 10% behind or 15% behind, and then you've got to get that back. So I don't know. That to me is going to be one of the things that we'll have to look forward to going forward in this season. And in the specific case of Anaheim, I mean, 5 new bodies, 5 to integrate into that lineup in a short period of time. That to me is a challenge. That'll be a challenge for Boudreau, because I think that when they have all hands on deck, Vatanin's close to coming back, Bolesky's coming close to coming back, they have good personnel. They have, if the goaltending holds up, their personnel is good enough. The Pacific is not that strong this year. People have often talked historically about how it's been one of the best divisions in hockey. I would argue that it might be the worst right now. You have Edmonton and Arizona at the bottom. You have San Jose that's still trying to sort things out. LA looks like they're going a little bit, and and Calgary and Vancouver have been very interesting, pleasant stories, but I don't think anyone sees them as powerhouses either. So then you've got Anaheim, and they got lots, but they still need to be better on the ice. I like their team on paper right now, but they have a month now to figure it out and to be firing on all cylinders when the playoffs start.
I completely agree, Kevin. I think you're muted still, but I think that this does kind of launch into my topic for today, which I thought would be a good way to also bring the trade deadline in as well, because we haven't discussed it. And my topic for today was the idea of teams going for it now versus teams building a situation where they're always going to be in the running, and if everything falls right, their goalies get hot, they stay healthy, they got a good shot. And you really saw, I thought, a definite divide between certain teams this year in this way. There was a absolute run on defensemen, way higher prices, I thought, than we would see for some of these guys. Braden Coburn, a good example, like players who just completely got more than I thought. And I guess we can talk about we'll talk a little bit about the trade deadline and then get into the topic a little bit more. But since Eric, what were some of your pluses and minuses from this deadline, so to speak, the teams you really thought did get better? And now, and in retrospect, of course, with some of the injuries, it's hard to say, but
yeah,
where are they now?
No, I mean, it's a great question because this was one of those trade deadlines. Normally, like you do. I don't like using winners and losers at the trade deadline because that, to me, doesn't quantify it properly. Yeah. I mean, you obviously Buffalo is not as good a team after stripping themselves of all of those assets. Arizona is not as good a team after stripping themselves of all of those assets. I mean, these are barely NHL teams. But so can you call them losers? Well, yeah, if they were trying to win games in 2014, 2015, they are definitely losers. But they got important assets that they can plug into the organization, depending on how scouting staffs, identify the players coming through and who you get with the picks that came in. They could be big-time winners, but we won't know for 5 to 7 years. So, So you really have to look at the teams that have gone out and got reinforcements. So, you look at the players, say, that Arizona gave up. Keith Yandel is playing a lot in New York, but I watch them closely. He's on my fantasy team, hasn't picked up a point yet. He has not quite figured it out in New York. Antoine Vermette doesn't have a point yet for the Chicago Blackhawks. He's a guy that was struggling towards the end in Arizona and is still trying to find his place there. So I don't see that any team right now has had like an honest to goodness boost from the events of the trading deadline. The one team that was active going into the trading deadline that I think vastly improved themselves is the Winnipeg Jets. Winnipeg, subsequent to the move for Tyler Myers, lost Dustin Byfuglien to an injury. He'll be back for the playoffs, but he's out for 2 to 4 weeks. Suddenly Tyler Myers has gone in there and playing with Toby Enstrom has been a force. He looks an awful lot like the player that came into the National Hockey League and just wowed everybody in his first year and to some extent in his second year too. So, whatever it was that was going wrong there, the freshness of the start has really energized Tyler Myers. And here in Canada, where you've got Winnipeg unexpectedly in the playoffs, Calgary unexpectedly in the playoffs, Vancouver unexpectedly in the playoffs, of those teams, I like the way Winnipeg is constructed right now. They brought in Stafford not for a big price. They brought in Stempniak not for a big price. They brought in Tulowitzki not for a big price. And these are just supplementary pieces that will have to support the guys that make it go there, like Wheeler, like Little, like Blatt. But they have a good group, and if the goaltending holds up, the way they play, they're modeled after Los Angeles in many respects. They're designed to play a best-of-7 series where they'll wear you out with their size and their physical play. Discipline has been an issue at different times this year, but I think they could be a scary first-round opponent for anybody. And certainly, if they end up being the crossover team and play in the Pacific in the playoffs, they're good enough to win the Pacific Division the way it's configured right now. So that's the one team. Like I said, I hate to talk about the actual 24 hours of the trading deadline. I prefer to
at this point,
talk about the trading deadline period. And Winnipeg is the one team that I think has really made strides.
and Kevin, I want your opinion on this too, because we talked a little bit about the trade deadline on the other show right afterwards, and I tried to draw the comparison because I hate the idea of winners and losers as well, and I thought to me there was a winning the battle and winning the war. Who won the battle? Who won the war? And the battle is what we're going to talk about mostly because that's what's apparent now. Winning the war, in the future, Philadelphia got a lot of picks. They could win a war. Like you said, Arizona. Buffalo. It's hard to tell. So these teams all have the chance, but before, and Kevin, one I wanted to get your opinion on what Eric just said. But one thought I had is, I've watched this team 3 times for some reason since the trade deadline, and the Max Talbot pickup by the Bruins is just one of those like really sneaky pickups that just put that team into focus, and completely enabled them to be the kind of team that Julian wants him to be. He can bring in Talbot to play times on deep. He can play him on any line. He's really popular. That's the kind of thing that so often is forgotten about at these trade deadlines, and that's the one that so far really has stuck out to me. But Kevin, what are your thoughts on Winnipeg and all?
Well, there's a lot of material here. I actually agree with Eric on the actual trades that were made. Like, Toulouse, when you compare him, for example, to some of the other players that went, a third-round pick, as I recall, which I thought was a really fair price. I mean, I think a lot of us felt that most teams overpaid, which often happens at the trade deadline. But I think history kind of shows that trade deadline acquisitions are overrated. Like, really, like last year when LA picked up Gabrick, that's really kind of an aberration. Generally you get some small boost, but it's not the difference between winning or losing. I mean, there have been some times during the years where players have played a big role. Again, like last season with Gabrick. But to me, we've talked before about trying to decide the winners and the losers, but I think you have to break it up into 2 categories, and like you just said, winning the war and winning the battles. But I separate out the sellers and the buyers because generally they're in 2 different places. Like I thought one of the biggest winners was the Arizona Coyotes because they were stripping their team down. They were going to get in a better position to compete in the Jack Eichel, Connor McDavid sweepstakes, and now they're going to have 2 first-round picks in both 2015 and 2016, and we know this year's draft is going to be good. In the long run, it's hard to argue that they didn't really benefit because they can still sign Vermette. In fact, I think it makes sense for him to want to go back to Arizona, where they need him, they want him. He knows he fits in. I was told he was very popular with his teammates. And so forth. I still think the Yandel acquisition is going to pay off. I agree with what Eric said. I saw him live against Detroit, and I've watched 2 of his games on television, and he hasn't figured it out yet. But now we have the Klein injury, which changes everything. I think because they brought Klein in as almost a missing piece. He completed what I think is a very skilled defense. Now Klein is out. They're going to have to bring in Hunwick or Summers on that defensive unit, and now you really need Yandel to play better defensively. And I thought what I liked most about that is it didn't matter to them that Yandel is not a great defensive player because they needed him to do one thing: quarterback the power play. Like Yandel was not the perfect fit for every team, but he was perfect for the Rangers. And now with Klein on, it's less true. But with regard to the bigger question, what we talked about. There's no one size doesn't fit all in terms of, when a team wins about what they should do next. Because some teams, when they get there, it's their one shot. The team has come together at the right time. You got the right number of older players, and then in other instances, they're just coming together. And okay, you just want to accent that. I mean, like when the Kings won the first time. I think all of us believed they could win again. I mean, Kopitar was still a young man, and they did win again. And I think after last season, we thought they could still win again, and just like we think the Blackhawks. But this, in my mind, this is the last run for the Blackhawks. Because now we're breaking this band up a little bit this summer. So I think it made a lot of sense for the Blackhawks to do what they did because there are going to be changes, and we know that. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how this all plays out. I liked what Chicago did at the deadline, but Vermette hasn't come in and been the player that we thought he would. So now we're going to have to wait and see if that happens.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that I disagree that Chicago that this is it for them though, but in some ways. But I do think they're going to have to make changes. But I think what they showed us is that they could do that before when they won this kind of cup. They had to make lots of changes. So.
Sure.
I kind of trust Bowman on this. I mean, the question is, are they going to have to go as deep as somebody like Seabrook or something like that? That's where the question really comes. Is it going to? But we have yet to see a player of that level be sacrificed for the salary cap in the NHL. I think we haven't. Boychuk might be maybe arguably the best player we've seen sacrificed for the salary cap at this point. Eric?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that Boychuk is the first name that came to mind, but I still think that Seabrook is in a different class. I mean, he's a guy who was in consideration for Canada's Olympic team. I don't think that they'll have to go with that. I mean, they've done a really good job ever since they won their first Stanley Cup of identifying their core, and their core are Taves and Kane, obviously, Keith and Seabrook, obviously, Corey Crawford, obviously, and then try to move guys. Around the periphery. So, it might be an Aduya, it might be a Chalmerson. But I do think that they believe that they can hang on to those guys too. So, there'll be a lot of kids. Like it'll be the Teravainens of the world that will just get a greater opportunity next year. Vermette probably doesn't figure into the mix. Richards doesn't figure into the mix. I think they're going to be a good competitive team for a while. But what has changed this year, and to me, the most interesting thing, talking to general managers after the trade deadline, and I'm sure Kevin got this too. Every general manager, when you start to talk about the big macro issue of who is going to win the Stanley Cup, they all think they can. They all think they can. There isn't a single team out there or general manager out there that says, boy, I don't know if we can get by Chicago, or I don't know about St. Louis. Everybody looks at the teams that have traditionally been real tough to take out in the playoffs, the tough outs like Los Angeles, like Chicago, and they see more vulnerability this year. And so then it's a question of, hey, we like our chances as much as anyone's. I mean, the other day I looked at the standings. There were 5 42-team wins. The Islanders had 43, and I think the Rangers had 41. And that's at the top of the National Hockey League. The 7 teams virtually in a tie for first place. I mean, normally at this time of year, the President's Trophy contenders are down to 2 or 3 teams. It's going to be one of this team, that team, or the other team. This year, there's still 7 or 8 that have a chance, depending on how they do in the final month of the season. So, I have no idea who's going to win the Stanley Cup, but you can be sure that internally there's a whole bunch of teams that think this might be their year. And when you always break down the stats, I always say this to owners of teams because owners tend to be the greediest people of all. I think fans are sometimes, we underestimate how knowledgeable fans are. Fans get it. Fans understand that when there's 30 teams, the odds are you win 1 championship in 30 years, 3 in a century. So in your lifetime, if you're a fan of team X, Y, or Z, you might see 2 championship seasons. You shouldn't really expect to see more. Owners aren't like that. Owners, because they're so successful, because they win in the business that they're in, and they win all the time in the businesses that they're in, because that's how come they have the financial wherewithal to own sports teams. They think they should win every year with their sports teams, and they get frustrated, and they start to do idiotic things that they wouldn't do in their other businesses, because it's like, hey, I've owned this team for 5 years, and we haven't won once. I mean, what's going on? And there really is. There's this genuine, like, I'm a winner, and how come my team isn't? It makes me look like a loser. It's crazy how that attitude manifests itself, and quite immature, but very real, very real. So
very real.
So anyway, what I'm saying, I guess that's a long way of getting to my point, which is that when you have the opportunity, like you do this year, when you legitimately have as good a core as anybody else, then you have to. That's why you saw first-round picks being traded, why you saw the prices being paid at the trade, because teams genuinely think, if we have 1 chance in 30, this might be it. Let's go for it.
Right. Those are awesome points. And I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you with owners. As I've talked to them as well, and they are completely different. And what people don't take into consideration enough, and I've caught some journalists that don't get this, is that and what an owner does say goes, and that there will be trades that happen because of it, and there will be actual moves that you could say a GM wouldn't make that. Well, maybe he might not make that move, but he might be told that he has to make that move. That does happen at the deadline. And I've been in situations where I've been fighting with people on the team who say, "Oh, there's no way we're going to make that move," and I said, "Have you talked to your owner lately?
Yeah.
You might make that move." That's not, and it's happened, and it's definitely happened. Forsberg to Nashville, for example. But yeah, these things happen, and there's no question. Kevin, your thoughts on the
Yeah,
owner?
well, I mean, I actually had a general manager tell me this season, right to Eric's point, that he said, there's no one in the league that scares you anymore. Like he said, I don't sit around, and it was a Western Conference saying, well, we can't beat the Blackhawks, they're too good, or we can't beat the Blues, or we can't beat the Kings. And he said, we said that about the Kings, over the last 2 or 3 years. They're a big, strong team, and you kind of exhale going, wow, I just don't know we can do that. He said there's no one actually in the league now that are like that because we've gotten better, and they've come back a little bit. The Kings, even though it's just Willie Mitchell, it is Willie Mitchell. He was an important part of their team last season. Mike Richards had to go down. Dustin Brown is not producing at the same level. They've lost Voinov. The Blackhawks have had issues. They've had injuries to deal with. Now the latest one being Kane. So they're not quite as scary. And I actually think that they will be good for a long time. But I'm not sure they can keep Johnny Oduya this season. And I think it's possible that either Bickle or Sharp could end up being dealt. Now Bowman has actually shown what he can do when he's stuck behind the 8 ball. I mean, he rebuilt that team, as Eric pointed out. But I agree. I think there's a real sense around the league that, we have a much better shot than we've ever had before. And I think it's the majority of teams. It's only the teams, that are really at the bottom. I mean, the Oilers, the Sabres, the Coyotes, those are the only teams that think, boy, we've got a lot of work to do. The other 27 are, believe it, Carolina. Like Carolina, I'm sure has meetings where they're saying, we're not that far. We've played well, in the last 6 or 7 weeks, and a lot of that is parity, and a lot of it is the fact that every team now has 4 or 5, really good players, and they're paying those players. But I mean, it really does make a difference, and I think that's why we do see the all-in type of strategy that we see at the trade deadline.
And I guess what all in is a really hard definition, right? What all in is a tough one. Did Nashville go all in when they got Franzen and Santorelli? They went for a first-round draft pick. They did send a first-round draft pick, but they're a very good team, and they've got a huge amount of talent pool to pull from. So do they need that first-round draft pick? Probably not. They could probably get by without it. They're very good at drafting in later rounds. They always have been. So maybe that's not all in for them. Although, to that argument, they got terrible after that trade. They really went, for whatever it's worth, whether that trade mattered or not, that there's questioning on did they mess up our chemistry. All this stuff started coming into play. Eric?
No, you're 100% right. And actually, I'm going to kick this over to Kevin because he knows Kenny Holland better than I do. But the one thing that Holland did and doesn't do anymore, hasn't done in a while, is that for a while Detroit was willing to go all in, right, quote unquote, and traded first-round picks and relied on the fact that they have had some success picking guys in the 2nd round, in the 4th round, in the 6th and the 7th round. But they understand that in a cap world right now that you want to compete for a championship, but you still have to have players coming in at the bottom. You got to have players who are going to play on entry-level contracts, players who play on second contracts without arbitration rights, and that keeps the price down so you can pay the Zetterbergs and the Datsyks and the Cronwalls at the top. And so I think the fact that Kenny Holland had an opportunity to move some of those high-end prospects and didn't, had an opportunity to move picks and didn't, that to me is they've been the model franchise in terms of how to build, and they've been able to adapt on the fly. I mean, the beauty of Detroit is that there was a time when you could spend whatever you wanted, they did. Suddenly you couldn't spend whatever you wanted, they changed their business model, and they've always been one step ahead of the curve. So when I'm looking for a direction, I tend to shift my focus to, okay, what is Detroit doing? What is Kenny Holland doing? Kenny's not giving up prospects. He's not giving up first-round picks. He still wants to win a championship. His team is right there in the mix, with Tampa and Montreal and Boston, they'll make the playoffs. You know, are they good enough to win? I don't know, but they've managed to replenish from within, and they didn't go all in, or whatever the equivalent of that is. And so, you know, to you, Kevin, I just think that you have to follow what he does as the, you know, as the template for how you want to run your organization, because they've just been doing it right for so long under so many different sets of rules that have come and gone in the National Hockey League.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and they have a great recognition of the idea that, you know, you need a ticket to get in the party, and you got to make the playoffs first, and they talk about that all the time. Like, you wouldn't think a team that's been in for 24 seasons would make that a point of emphasis, but every season that's where they start. They talk about, okay, we got to get in the playoffs, and you know, they talk about that. And Ken Holland did say about a month ago, we're not giving up our first-round picks. We're not giving up Dylan Larkin. We're not giving up Mantha. And I don't really even want to give up my second-round pick, but maybe it'll come to that.
Right.
And, you know, he stuck to that because he believes, just as Eric articulated, that you need those guys coming up off the bottom, you know, to make your salary structure work. You have to have those players that are under $1 million, and you got to have 5, 6, 7, or 8 of those in order to make sure you have enough money to you know, put together your top 2 lines and your top 4, you know, defensemen, and it's absolutely crucial. And you know, that's, you know, the argument against what the Rangers have done. Like, I liked what they've done, but now it's going to be 2017 before they get another first-round draft pick. That's going to be 4 seasons they've gone without a first-round pick. At some point, they're going to pay a price for that. I mean, you have to, unless, you know, you've drafted so well in the later rounds, and you know, you were seeing that with the Devils, who have not drafted well in the first round, and all of a sudden they look like their cupboard is depleted. So, you know, it's tricky business if you're a general manager, but I do agree that Detroit seems to have a pretty good handle on how it should be done in order to stay, you know, competitive. You know, they haven't won since 2008, but they've been right there. I mean, and even last season, like, I don't think they ever got enough credit for the job they did just to get into the playoffs last season.
Yeah.
Like that, you know, they really were playing with the JV team for the longest time. And at one point, I remember, you know, they were talking about there were 12 players on the roster who had played at Grand Rapids, you know, that season that were, you know, among, you know, the 20 they were competing with, you know, just trying to get in the playoffs. And you know, the best way to look at that is, look what happened. We all thought that Columbus was a rising team, and they had got overrun by injuries, just like the Red Wings did last season when there was no Datsuk and Zetterberg and Eriksson was out, and it was a real mess. Well, when that happened to the Red Wings, they still got into the playoffs.
Yeah.
When it happened to the Blue Jackets, they're in the Connor McDavid sweepstakes. You know,
Right.
That's the difference between a team that is an established team that knows what they're doing, that you know, has a plan B and a C, that they've dealt with this issue for many seasons, and you know, and we see the results.
No, it's a great point, and I'm glad you brought up Glenn Sather too, because he is definitely one of the other extremes on this, and he always has been. He will go all in. It wasn't surprising when he went after Yandel or before Rick Nash or something like players in this way. He will do this, and it sometimes has backfired on him for a while, but right now he seems to be in a really good spot, because actually when you look at the players that are key to them, they have a lot of them signed for quite a while, and quite a few of them are young, which is new to the Rangers. You know, this is the Stepans and Zuccarello. These guys they're young, and they're you know, Hagelin. These are really talented players that he's got tied up for a while. And
well, he's sly like a fox too.
Yeah.
Like, and I thought about this when it was over. You know, so Zuccarello was their first line right wing, and on the Friday before trade deadline, Larry Brooks, who knows that team better than any reporter, I mean, he's a really knowledgeable guy on what's happening with the Rangers. He reports, and I'm sure very accurately, that Zuccarello may be traded.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a trade deadline comes and goes, and they add Yandel, and Zuccarello's still there. So Zuccarello now seems like it's almost like a trade acquisition. Like, oh my God, Yandel's coming. Zuccarello is still there. Is he still here? It felt like they made 2 big trades, because it's almost like fans had reconciled with the idea of, well, Zuccarello's going to be gone. Yeah. Well, you know, I started to think about that. You know, I bet Slash just kind of put that out there. You know, just
I
because
totally agree.
You know, it really did feel like they made two major acquisitions at the trade
And
deadline.
he's done that before. This is not the
Well, I
first
did it
time.
with Callahan last year, right? I mean, with you know, I think a lot of people were very surprised that Ryan Callahan got traded when he did, because it seemed like, no, you can't trade your captain. You can't trade your captain. Oh, they traded their captain. Well, if they can trade their captain at the deadline because they can't sign him to a contract, for sure they could have at least looked at trading Zuccarello. Absolutely.
And I'm
right.
confident. I'm confident that Zuccarello, when he heard that he was going to be traded, said to his agent, "We better revisit this because I think he likes it." I thought, I mean, when you look at what he signed for, that's less money than he would have gotten on the open market. For sure.
Definitely.
So,
And this happened with Stepan before. Remember, it happened with Dubinsky. So it really hasn't been as if he's cried wolf, because, like you said, Dubinsky's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, Callahan's gone. Stepan remained, but he really has. He's a hard negotiator, and and I know with Callahan it really was an issue, because I think Callahan saw all the other negotiations and was just, I'm not going to play this game, and it just came to a head. But my gosh, that worked out incredibly well for him, because I mean, what are the odds that Marty St. Louis wants to come to your city, to your team? I mean, it was just a great break. I mean, that's a little puck luck if I've ever seen. And then right there, I mean, that was perfectly done.
Yeah.
I mean, so looking forward to some of these other teams that we've talked about. We have like for example, let's look at the Predators for a second. The Predators, they do go all in, you would say, because they traded that pick, but they didn't really give up anything off their roster. And then they go on a tailspin. That was starting to look like, wow, this team has played, too many games. Laviolette system's too trying. They're exhausted. All these questions being thrown out. They're starting to turn it back around, Kevin. But I think the Predators are another example of the teams in the West saying, well, they're beatable too.
Well, absolutely. But I think teams thought that before. And whenever you're new to the party, and the Predators, this team is new in terms of, they weren't there, last season, and they're more offensive than they've been under Barry Trotz. It's a different attacking system. They still have the same defense. Pekka Rinne is back. But I thought it was interesting this week. Mike Babcock talked about his team sort of having the blahs. And coaches don't usually admit that. I think we've all seen what he's talking about. And basically he just said, look, these are human beings. And all of our jobs, we have periods during the year when you're either waiting for a big event to come, like if you're an accountant, in tax season you're going to have to gear up, you're ready to go, you're going to be doing a lot during tax season. So probably in the couple months before the tax season, you just have this sort of malaise period where it's coming, you've gotten through. Well, he basically said, I'm not worried about my hockey team because we're just in the blah period. And I think that's what happened to the Predators as well. I just think we're in the dog days. We're still a little bit too far away from the playoffs. They've had this momentum all season. They've exceeded expectations. Rinne hasn't been quite as sharp. He's still been good, but he hasn't been. He was just so good early on, and he hasn't been at that level. And I think they've gone through that. I really don't think it has much to do with the trade. I'm sure people are going to say maybe it disrupted chemistry a little bit, but I just think they're going through that period you sometimes go through during a season. I mean, even in your best season, if you have a 50-win season, you're still going to have 32 games when you weren't, all that good. And I think we're seeing that with the Predators, where they're just going through that time.
And then on the other side of this, Eric, is Calgary, who doesn't do anything, and yet they know their best player or best defenseman is gone for the season, and they know that they're in a battle for their lives for a playoff spot, and they don't do anything, and they're obviously looking longer term, and thinking that they're going to build this slowly, and they didn't do anything, and yet losing their defenseman, they came out east and won a couple really good games against teams like Philly and Detroit, and they battled they battled a bunch of teams. That was interesting to watch.
Yeah, well, what they did was they made, you were talking about the minor move for Max Talbot. Well, Calgary did something similar. They picked up David Schlemko on waivers from Dallas. So you just say to yourself, wow, that's really not much. But Schlemko was in the Arizona Coyotes organization when Brad Treliving, who was the general manager of Calgary, first-year general manager, was there. So he understood what his upside was. They signed him as a free agent originally out of Medicine Hat, played on the same team as Chris Russell, who's been a guy that's been real good for Calgary this year. So they had a really good scouting report on him from a former teammate and from a former member of an organization that had drafted and developed him. And Schlemko, about 3 or 4 years ago, was playing, a fair number of minutes for the Phoenix Coyotes. So they felt that he could come in and give them minutes. Obviously, he doesn't give them the minutes that Giordano does, but he's a useful guy that has come in and is playing for them now. Basically, last night he was playing with Brody, so that's in Giordano's spot. But no, you're right. They have said all year long, and they have stuck to this, that they are thinking big picture thoughts. So that as much as the run that they've been on this year has really energized the town. I mean, this is a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 5 years and was thought to be bottoming out. And I think there was a lot of fear that they could be at the bottom for a long period of time, and they've managed to come straight right out of it. And Sean Monahan has given them way more in his second year than they thought. Johnny Gaudreau has given them more in his first year than they thought. But they didn't feel that there was anybody out there that they could look at that could legitimately make a difference and would convince them to give up, tangible assets. So you're right. They ended up, in fact, they traded a prospect. They traded Sven Berchi to the Vancouver organization. They got a second rounder. They traded Glenn Cross and got a second and third, and that was their big haul. On a much different level, they were trying to do the same thing that the Arizonas and the Buffaloes were. They were trying to get bank draft picks. They'll have 6 picks in the top 80 of what a lot of scouts say is a terrific draft. And they also understand that sometimes when you get to the draft, if you've got extra second and third round picks, maybe you can get a roster player then. So they're an interesting team because the analytics say that they shouldn't be where they are. The puck possession numbers are terrible. In the game against Anaheim recently, they scored 3 goals and 4 shots in the second period. It's just one of those years, like Colorado last year, where things are going right for them. And probably deep down, they know that this will be a difficult thing to sustain. I'm sure that however the season ends, whether they're in the playoffs, out of the playoffs, whether they've won a round or not, the conclusion will be we've built a foundation and now we have to build up. And sometimes what happens is if you're further along the path than you thought, there's a tendency to plateau and maybe even take a step backwards. That's happened to Colorado this year. It's what happened to Dallas this year. Both those teams will be better next year. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out in the Western Conference. But I don't think that they were really tempted at any point to go out and make a big move. I mean, the one guy they could have looked at Wisniewski. When you think about what Anaheim gave up, they could have given a bad contract back. A Devin Setaguchi, a pick, they would have had that. I mean, it wasn't like there was and they could have given perhaps Berchi instead of Carlson went in that trade. So they could have come up with a comparable package if they wanted to, and he could have stepped in and been in their top 4. They just decided, no, don't want to do that. So, I give them credit because I think that sometimes you get, the blood gets up at the trading deadline, and you lose a guy like Giordano, and we got to fix, and they said, no, we're quick fixes. We've tried those in the past. They've been a disaster. We're not going to succumb to that temptation. And they didn't.
It makes sense. I mean, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add to that. I agree exactly with that. I mean, there's two kind of teams going into the playoffs. There's momentum teams, and there's teams that believe they have the right stuff. And I think the Flames accurately identified that they are a momentum team. Just as Eric said, very similar in my mind to Colorado. I mean, last season, Colorado didn't win because they were ready to compete. They won because they found a very unique level of confidence where they believed they could win all one-goal games. They won so many of them. And I think Patrick Waugh knew that. And that's why at the start of the season, before they'd even played one game, I remember him saying, I think, I have some concerns about this team, because I think he knew, just as Eric said, that they were, you can't keep that up for 2 seasons. And the Flames this season, their confidence and their momentum has come from their ability to come from behind in the third period. This is a team that feels really good about itself. It feels like it can do a lot. Hartley has gotten a lot out of that, and I think they knew that we can't make one acquisition that's just going to make us put us closer to winning the cup. So why do it? You know, we're based. That's why they've been able to survive without Giordano. Like, that should have been more devastating for them because he is such an important player than Kane's loss is to the Blackhawks. It should have been, because Giordano's had such an incredible season, but it wasn't, because, you know, this is a team. It wasn't really relying on one player. It was just relying on its confidence, and the fact that, you know, everybody's playing well. You know, everyone's on the oar going in the right direction. So I thought that was the right decision right on trade deadline day.
No, I thought so too. I mean, Wisniewski I think probably the most surprising thing that happened on trade deadline day for me, because I thought that they would have held out. They told me they were going to hold out for a first-round draft pick, and they didn't get one. And I thought, and then at the end of the day, why were they in such a? Does anyone know why they were in such a rush to trade James Wisniewski? It felt like a suddenly out of nowhere a thing. You know? Do you agree, Kev?
Yeah, it did seem that way, and I'm actually a Wisniewski fan. Like, I understand, you know, his warts. You know, he's never really been quite as good as you want him to be, but I think he brings so many different elements. And what I really like about him is I see him as like the ultra competitor. Like, he really competes hard in every game, and he's very passionate. You know, and he stands up for his teammates. He can do a little bit of everything. You know, he's above average offensively. He's got a high compete level. He's not as strong defensively as you want, and he's prone to making, you know, some unwise decisions now and then. But, you know, every defense in the NHL has a few players like that, and you know, they're important players. And as I said in a recent podcast, you know, the trick is you want a guy to take enough risk to be intriguing and not enough to be a problem. And, you know, maybe Wisniewski is right on that border. You know, maybe that's how they saw it. But I thought it was also a bit unique that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it just seemed like we got to move him. We got to move him now.
Well, I remember writing a blog about Wisniewski and saying that, you know, I was surprised that he wasn't considered more for the Olympic team. You know, that I thought, and yet it didn't seem like he really was. Correct?
No, not at all. Like, he was never even, you know, among the, you know, I mean, like, every American was on the initial list, but he didn't make the first cut. Like, you really needed at that point to have someone stand up for you and say, and no one was there standing up for Wisniewski, saying, look, you know, we got to take a hard look at this guy. Yeah, he was not considered after making the first cut.
Interesting. I wanted to finally, and before we go, I did want to touch base with the MVP voting right now, because it is sort of getting intriguing. And I wanted to talk to Eric, you about you know, this push that John Tavares seems to be making right now. I mean, a lot of people think this could be Price's still to lose, but Tavares is really playing like an MVP.
No, I agree with that. You know, one of the things that I always enjoy doing is we always do our mid-season MVP picks. And then it's always a fun thing to revisit them as it gets closer to the time when the actual ballots are in our hands to see how the guys that we had there at the top of the first half are doing. You know, and I remember I think I had Ryan Getzlaf in mind, because that was Anaheim was still like that #1 record in the league, and they played pretty much 2 months without Corey Perry, and they hadn't missed a beat. And Getzlaf, I think, was the player of the month for December, and he was just playing lights out great on a team that didn't really look like it had very much. And Giordano, obviously, you know, Calgary unexpectedly in the playoff race. He was challenging for the Norris. You know, if you were specifically to take the definition of the heart, you know, most valuable to his team, I think a lot of people, you know, until Giordano got hurt, would have said that he was that guy. And then there is always that temptation. You know, you sort of give a nod to the goaltenders that are playing well, but goalies have to really, you know, be exceptional. It's like, you know, pitchers winning MVP and the Cy Young. And so that was the first half. And now we're at the point where, you know, in a month we're going to have to make these decisions. And I do think that you know, you get to vote for 5. If I was voting today, I would probably have Price and Rene on my MVP ballot, because partly out of default. You know, when I look at the NHL scoring race, you know, it's so crowded, you know, that there hasn't been any separation at all among the forwards. And, you know, Tavares has inched in front in terms of the scoring race. So then you look at the Islanders and where they're at, and would they be there without him? Probably not. If you took him out of the mix, how would they be? They took a Poso out of the mix, and you know, he made, you know, all those other. Anders Lee all of a sudden became, you know, a terrific player. So right. I think for sure Tavares. is in the conversation right now. It's interesting that probably Ovechkin isn't, because it would be hard pressed to say in Washington, is Ovechkin their MVP or is Backstrom their MVP? Both have been very, very good. I think that a month ago I would have had Patrick Kane on my ballot, because I think that he was playing exceptionally well, and I think he was having his best year and keeping Chicago competitive. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's another one of these years where, like when Kevin and I first started, you'd mark Wayne Gretzky on your ballot and then everybody else, and it was the easiest thing to do for the longest period of time, and it gets more and more complicated all the time because it is so close at the top of the NHL right now. I didn't think last year was any issue. I mean, it was going to be Crosby, should have been unanimous. I guess it was close to being unanimous. This year, it's going to be scattershot all over the place, and I'll be very interested to see who comes out on top. As of this moment, I've got Carey Price as my number one.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am too. What about you, Kevin?
Well, I mean, my AM preview this morning was 5 reasons why Rene is the leader for the MVP, and basically one of my 5 reasons were statistically he's ahead of the field with exceptional numbers, and the second thing is it is supposed to be the most valuable to his team, and where would the Canadians be with the offense that they have without Carey Price playing away as that? I mean, they're a bottom-rung offensive team, 23rd or 24th. I can't remember which one now, but they're down near the bottom. And the numbers that he's put up are better than the numbers that both Theodore and Hasek had, the two goalies in the last 50 years who have been MVPs. And as Eric mentioned, it's sort of wide open among the scorers and defensemen. Like Tavares is one of my guys. I have him ranked second on my list. I think he's been exceptional. I think he's been more like Crosby than Crosby has this season. I think he's been exceptional especially in the last month, and a primary reason why the Islanders are there. But I think this is the year. Price has given up 17 goals in his last 13 games. Like, that's just phenomenal. And at one period, he had given up 11 goals in 10 periods, and he's a leader on that team. We don't think of goalies as being a leader, but I noticed, when I'm watching the post game, he's the guy standing up doing the talking, explaining what's up with the team, and I think he's. Whatever happened in Sochi, I think it changed him. I think he's a much more confident goalie, and I think he's a different guy now. And he was good before, and now he's great.
What's amazing is that the Maple Leafs have scored 5 more goals than the Canadians have. To put that in perspective, how good Carey Price has had to have been, to actually keep them at the top. And and the Maple Leafs have had. We've all read about how much they've struggled to score. So this is a team that they've only. There are not that many, the Blue I think it's the Blue Jackets have maybe one, or they've actually scored almost the same amount of goals as the Avalanche. All these teams that we've heard about struggling to score, and yet the Canadians are at the top of this list. So my final question is this: Is it better, as you guys both being MVP voters for so many years, is it better to have a second half of the season that's good?
Yes, there's no doubt about it. I think an awful lot of our voters have over the years. When it's been close, we'll look at the play in the final month of the season. I look at the year that Corey Perry won in 2011, or the year Joe Thornton won, over Yager. It was the fact that these guys were so good in the final month, and the publicity drums were beating for them at that point in time. And Kevin, you made a great point about momentum teams and teams that have the right stuff. There's a lot of momentum voting too, and in some ways it bothers me a little bit. I had somebody gave me the argument the other day that Devin Dubnyk should be the MVP of the league, and I said, how do you figure that? Well, because he went in there and turned that team around. I said, absolutely agree with that. Minnesota probably misses the playoffs. If they don't make that trade, they're going to make the playoffs now. They might win the Stanley Cup. But the reality is he's been there for 40 games and been exceptional. And Carey Price has been in Montreal for 70 games and has been exceptional. And to me, the greater body of work is Price's play from October till now rather than Dubnyk from the moment he arrived. And so that, to me, makes it makes it very easy to vote for Carey Price. But somebody's trying to make and sometimes it's just an intellectual argument that it should be Dubnyk, and it's like, yeah, maybe you give him your fifth place on your ballot because you want to acknowledge what he has done for that team. But Minnesota is a much better team. When you go position player by position player, compare Minnesota to Montreal, there's no contest. Minnesota has just way better players. But there are people who will have those ballots in their hands that might enter Devan Dubnyk 1 or Devan Dubnyk 2 just for that reason. And to me, it just doesn't stand. It's not a rational argument. It's not a rational argument.
And because it is, the second half does play a big role, and Corey Perry is the best example of that. He was so hot at the end, and it was really he was statistically overwhelming, and it really stuck in your mind as you voted. But he needed the benefit of, it was really a little bit unclear who was going to be the MVP, and he needed that. But when he needed that landscape so that when we thought about how statistically hot he was at the end, and the guy that could be a Perry this year could be Ovechkin. Now I agree with what Eric says about Backstrom versus Ovechkin, but Ovechkin's now on one of those tears where he has 22 goals in 23 games. If he suddenly gets 40 goals over the last or 42,
yeah, he could get 60 goals.
Yeah. Or more. If he just goes on that roll, that could be one of those things where he could complicate the voting, just because at some point, and this happened with Carlson, the statistics become so overwhelming. Yeah. And again, it much depends on what Washington does, but because I think to me, I want this guy to be having an impact in the standings as well. The MVP needs to have an impact in the standings.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Do you guys get campaigned about this? Do you ever find yourself in the middle of talking to somebody and realize you're being campaigned for an MVP or another award?
I don't think that happens as much as it used to. I think there was a time when teams would send out press releases when they mounted campaigns, and I don't find that that's the case anymore. I think it has something to do with a change that Kevin made when he was running the Writers Association. It was a lot easier to campaign 63 of us in a 21-team NHL because there were 3 voters for 21 NHL teams, and every public relations manager pretty much knew who was going to be voting in Calgary, voting in Edmonton, voting in Vancouver, voting in Los Angeles. It was, and so there are a lot more voters now, and so I think it's just harder to do. I do think that a lot of people who vote, they pay attention to, like Kevin will make his picks, I'll make mine, Pierre LeBrun will make his, everyone, and so some of these things are clear cut, but most of us, before we actually fill in our ballots, tell people the direction we're going and why we're doing it. And so I do think that you can sometimes have an influence over voters who haven't thought about the Selke or haven't thought about the Bing, or even for that matter the Hart. If you make a good case for your guy, I think you can sway some people a little bit. But in terms of campaigning, yeah, I don't know, Kevin. I don't get campaigned as much as I used to.
No, but I think you do have a responsibility when you are a national writer, because I agree. Like, I know when I write who I feel is going to be the Selke candidate, everything else, I feel a responsibility, because I know people are going to read that, and other voters are going to read that, and everybody knows I've been around a long time, just like everyone knows Eric's been around a long time, and some of those, like Selke, is a very difficult decision to make. It just is, because there are a lot of forwards and everybody's in different roles, and the matchups aren't the same. You're sometimes comparing apples to oranges in terms of who's playing against whom on a regular basis. So, and then everybody looks at it differently. Is it do you take a guy who plays a lot shorthanded, or is it just 5-on-5 play? I mean, it's complicated. So yeah. I think you have a responsibility when you're going to publish your ballot, as we all, or not all of us, but some of us do. You should take care. I mean, you should anyway, but you should really take care, because everybody is going to be influenced by what you say.
Yeah, I do love this. I remember, Eric, you and I having a debate with another Toronto writer one time about this whole thing of whether or not writers, this was over one of the media meals, about whether or not writers should publish their results or not. You guys obviously both do, and you both feel strongly that you should. His argument was that, what if you're working for a team and, then you suddenly feel bad because you can't you don't if you vote against somebody and it's a close battle between two guys and you don't vote for the guy on your team, you still have to cover that team. That's a difficult spot to be in. Ever found that happen with you, Art?
Well, no, because I mean, I would always write what I think, and that didn't bother me, that. But yeah, I don't. No writer should feel the pressure to vote one way or the other just because of his own personal. You have to sit down there and say the guys that deserve to win are this guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy, and here are the reasons. And well, that's what we do. I mean, that's just journalistic integrity. So yeah, I've never even thought about that.
Yeah. I want to just clarify my position on it because I have said many times. I actually. I publish mine. I always have said who I voted for, and I would recommend that people do that because transparency is what we demand, and so we should do that. However, I've never believed that we should tell another writer what he or she should do with their ballot. Like if someone says to me, "I don't want to publish my ballot," I don't want to. I'm against saying everybody has to publish their ballot. I think that's a personal decision in America. The secret ballot is a time-honored right, and if someone feels strongly about that just wants to keep their ballot the way it is, I'm fine with that. I really am. Even though I would recommend that he or she do it, I don't want to force writers to do that. If they're just more comfortable, so be it.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. But obviously, in the day, I remember this part of this debate was, and I'm debating for the other guy now because I agree with both of you, but. He said, in the day and age of Twitter now, I can't write who I'm voting for because I'm gonna get slammed on either way. There's a little bit. I guess that's maybe another discussion altogether. But it is one of those.
Who cares? Who cares?
Who cares? Right. I know. That's. I'm with you, and I think that what is at the end of the day, the world's not going to end if someone disagrees with your vote for the Selkie. It's not going to end. And yeah, I agree with you completely. This is always a great show. This is my favorite thing to do every week. I'm so glad we got it in. So what are you working on, Eric, at the Globe and Mail right now?
Well, actually, I'm doing something that's a little bit different. I'm doing a larger look at the American Hockey League expansion to California.
Wow.
Which to me is one of those stories that kind of it happened and but we were also busy doing other things that we didn't really sort of take a good hard second look at it. But I'll argue that this is the like since the WHA and NHL merger in '79, maybe the IHL AHL merger would qualify. It's a really significant shift. I mean, you've moved 5 franchises. You've created a separate division in California. They're going to play a shorter schedule. It means that that all those crazy travel day stories you have of teams trying to fly guys in from Manchester to Los Angeles or Glens Falls to Calgary and guys not getting in and pulling guys out of the stand to be backup goalies or whatever. That will be a day of the past. So I talked to Dave Andrews and all of the California teams, the Alberta teams, and I'm doing a longer look at what that means. It's sort of a half a business story and half a sports story. But it was fun to report because I learned a lot. Sometimes the answers to a story going in, and sometimes you ask the questions and you get answers that surprise you a little bit. And so it has a little bit to do with the evolution of the American Hockey League, what the impact will be on these Western teams of having their farm teams much closer at hand, something that the Eastern teams are used to. So that's the primary thing that I'm I'm putting to bed in the next couple of days.
Maybe we should put that on Twitter when it comes on. Kevin, what are you working on?
Well, since Johnny Boychuk signed right before we went on the air, I'll be doing a column about that. And during the course of this show, I've just sort of thought that one of my points is going to be that I think this is a real indication that the Islanders have not only turned the corner in terms of its competition, but as a franchise. I mean, when they got Leddy to stay, that's just kind of a special circumstances. Like I think it's forgotten now that Leddy was on the championship team and was a contributor, but Quenneville would reduce his ice time and not even play him at times. So he's found like a home on Long Island where he's appreciated. So it was easy for him to sign. You had to really prove to Boychuk like he was going to be the hottest free agent, and I think the fact that he has decided to stay for 7 years, I guess if his tweet is to be believed, that's a real indication that okay, the Islanders have arrived. That he's sold on the idea they're going to go to Brooklyn. He's okay with that. He likes the team, And because on the open market he would have been real hot. So that, and then next week I'm going to go to Florida, so you can guarantee the weather in Michigan will be great, because I didn't go down to Florida when it was freezing cold. And I'm going to do a story on the two Florida franchises and how you have the Lightning that have thrived and really have been sort of become a model franchise in terms of the way they're performing at the gate and on the ice, and then the Panthers are still trying to find that rhythm, a rhythm that they've really not had since their first couple of seasons, and sort of contrasting what's going on there.
I look forward to that too. Well, thanks guys so much. We'll see you next week, and remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Talk to you then.